Okay, Tom, we'll have a look at this and see if this feedback proves helpful. So, explain how inflation is measured in the UK through indices such as the RPI and the CPI. 15-mark question, part A. So we'd expect to start with the definition of inflation. So inflation is a percentage increase in the price that goods and services goes up by each year. Fine, that's good. Two main types of inflation. These are actually causes of inflation rather than types. But I suppose it's legitimate to explain both of them. Okay, so this information here on demand pull inflation and cost push inflation, it's correct, but it's not directly what we're doing here. You know, we need to define inflation and we need to explain how it's measured. The essay hasn't asked us for the causes of inflation, so although all that information there is correct, I probably wouldn't have included it. Okay, so what I'm looking for after my initial definition, and this is my definition bit here, so when I get a little bit further down, we'll just move this up here, is I want to read about the fact that it's a basket of goods, and I want to read something about the weightings in the basket of goods. So this material here is quite good on how the basket of goods is constructed. The bit on the weighting there is a bit lightweight. I want the weighting bit to say, the weights are basically from the family expenditure survey. They reflect how much is spent on each good. Petrol would have a higher weight than, straw bedding for hamsters, because people spend more on petrol than hamsters. I want a little bit of softer information about the weights there. So that's only okay, I think. Okay, this bit here is very slightly technically inaccurate. If I had 2% inflation in each 3-month period, my inflation over the year wouldn't be 2% times 4, i.e. 8%. It would be 1.02 times 1.02, etc. It would be 1.02 to the power of 4, because the price rise is a compound thing. It's like compound interest rather than simple interest. Okay, this bit's okay. I like the fact that limitation is different people have different baskets of goods. The only problem with it is duties there. It's IES. Words that end in Y generally have IES in the plural. Although to be fair, you've got the apostrophe correct here to show that it's the the country's inflation level and it's possessive. So we'll let you off with that one. So at the bottom here, we're starting to look at the RPI, which is fine. So we've got the RPI and the CPI, and presumably we're going to go on to the difference between the two. So finally, we have got a little bit on the RPI versus the CPI. So let's just review what we've got in your first part of your answer and see how I feel about it. Okay, so makes the correct start in defining inflation. I'm happy with that. Then goes on to cost push and demand pull. They're not really types of inflation. They're different theories of what causes inflation. That information wasn't really relevant. Then it did have some information on the basket of goods, which was fine. Perhaps could have picked out two people like students, pensioners, and explained how their baskets of goods are different. Then it did have some stuff on the weightings, not comprehensive, but some stuff on the weightings. And then finally we did have a little bit on the difference between the RPI and the CPI. So that's reasonably good. That's covered most of the information I wanted. So I'm thinking that that's a low A grade, so that part's out of 15. So let's just say that's worth 12 or 13 out of 15. Okay, so this bit's starting pretty well. We've got inflation and deflation. So you have just reminded us what inflation is and talked about deflation, so that's a very logical start. This referred back to the first part, which is okay. I quite like this bit here. So we've got different types of deflation. We've got deflation with okay. So we've got two causes. Okay, aggregate supply would go to the right if we had deflation, wouldn't it? It would move outwards and to the right. So that's a slight technical error there. But that is good. We might call that benign deflation. But the bad deflation, we would call it malign, M-A-L-I-G-N, or bad inflation, is where aggregate demand falls. So I quite like all of this bit here. That's really good. This bit I'm not sure we need to have at the moment, because we can't say we're for inflation or deflation, to better or worse, because obviously we're going to write the answer and then we're going to know the answer. So this last sentence here is perhaps unnecessary. Okay, so this little paragraph here about demand pull inflation being good is fine. I think it's seen as a positive thing the economy is over-egging it. I mean, obviously demand comes with rising GDP, which is good, but it could have some negative consequences. Inflation might devalue the savings that old people have accumulated over their lifestyle. So that just needs to be tempered into saying it's got advantages rather than saying it's good, because obviously it does have disadvantages too. Okay, the bit on cost push inflation here is right. I mean, cost push inflation can't really be a good thing. So we have got some sort of distinction between the two there. So that's reasonable. It's fair enough. Yeah, I quite like this little point here. It's subtle. So demand pull inflation mitigated by GDP growth. Like the word mitigated. That's evaluation. That's going to get some marks. And I really like this bit. It remains that for a period of time before wages adjust. I really like that. It's quite a subtle evaluation. That's the most intelligent bit of this essay today. Okay, it's a little bit here on anticipated inflation. Could be fine, but it kind of sounds like a different topic. This kind of feels like time for a paragraph. Looking at how long this paragraph is here, it's like a monster paragraph, isn't it? And this point here felt like time for a change. Okay, I quite like this bit. Deflation. This bit, deflation is caused by a decrease in AD, is very bad. It's nice and simple. It's correct. Obviously, we could have more sophisticated language, but unambiguously disadvantageous or something. But that's basically right. All of this bit's quite good. I mean, the classic example is Japan. Japan has been in deflation since the 1990s, and it's finding that monetary policy doesn't work. Even if you cut the interest rate, people just won't gamble and go and spend money. And when cutting the interest rate can no longer stimulate people to borrow, that's called a liquidity trap. It's a very famous bit of economics. So this bit here is really intelligent, but it would be good if it was related to the very famous concept called the liquidity trap. Okay, this paragraph here on hyperinflation is right. So up here, we've talked about deflation being bad, and here we've said hyperinflation's bad. It's just a little bit of a jump. We're on deflation. There's no linking text. Suddenly we're on inflation. We're not only just on inflation, we're straight to hyperinflation. I was looking perhaps for a bit more structure here. I think this conclusion here is right. It does summarise the issue. It does show you've understood the issue. I think part B's okay. It's got a good amount of content. It's all technically correct content. Perhaps could have been slightly more obvious in its paragraphing. Line of space between paragraphs to make it clear when we're moving on to a new issue. Perhaps slightly clearer in its structure. I'm very obviously going to explain inflation and deflation. Then I'm going to do advantages of inflation, disadvantages of inflation. I'm going to relate those to real-world experiences. I'm going to do adds of deflation, disadds of deflation. I'm going to relate that to real-world experiences. Then I'm going to come to a conclusion at the end. But overall, I like it. The written English is good. It's accurate. It's correctly spelt. The economics is correctly spelt. I think improvements would have come from just having a few more real-world examples and just being a little clearer with the reader about what your structure is. I'm going to do this, now I'm going to do this, and perhaps just using one or two little phrases like to evaluate, how likely is this situation about to come about. So put to evaluate, obviously to get into the very highest mark bands, you need some evaluation marks. So that answer, we've got mark bands 1 to 5. When I've been on days marking, they're very, very harsh. That's got to be a mark band 4. I think a mark band 4 would give you an A. Mark band 5 is really, it's an exceptionally good answer. So I'm thinking, yeah, I could easily give that answer 21 right at the top of level 4. I suppose the limit on your answer there is evaluation. So say I give that 21. I don't know what I said for the first part, say 12, 13. So if we say 34 out of 40, about 85%. I think that feels right. I think that the last few essays I've seen for you feel good. Just that little bit of sophistication required to get to A star, but they're certainly looking good, solid A grade essays.